I'm Mark Bouris, and this is Straight Talk.
Everyone that's going to vote for Harris is going to tell you. I reckon 5 out of 100 that are voting for Trump won't tell you. And that's been proven in the past.
Joe Hockey. Hello,
Mark
mate.
Bouris.
Mate, how you going? What do you think is the net effect if Trump wins?
The amount of announcements he's made, if he were to deliver them on tax cuts, tariffs and everything else, would be diabolical.
What about if she wins, though?
I don't know. It's much better because she's talking about price controls. And everyone's going, well, how's that going to work? Harris has not defined herself, so she still remains a big policy mystery.
And if I was to ask you now, Joe, what do you think will happen in the election next year in Australia?
Oh, well, it's obviously going to be close. Firstly...
And do you see the current ambassador? Do you have much to do with Canberra?
I do. And, you know, Kevin...
Joe Hockey. Hello,
Mark
mate.
Bouris.
Mate, how you going? Okay,
It's been a long time we've known each other.
A very long time. Well, actually, I remember, I was only thinking about today, that, I remember meeting you like when Michael Yabsley was raising money for the Liberal Party.
God, yeah, that's
right.
right.
Maybe 2000,
1990s. Early 90s.
Totally. And
wow.
Yabsley got me in a restaurant with a bloke who's was a friend of mine at the time. I haven't seen him for a long time, but we agreed to put some moderate amount of money into your campaign, which is not much those days. We thought it was a lot, but for me at the time. But
well, you can make up for it now.
I know I can. Just to embarrass you, like because I really need to do this to you because Kerry would never forgive me. Kerry Packer would never forgive me if I don't tell the audience about this story. And it's the only part I'm going to talk about. The rest of it, I'm just going to ask questions. I'm going to ask, and it's going to all be about you. But this story is all about you, just to give the audience a taste of the bloke that's sitting in front of me. Now, this is what I call a proper treasurer. That's my view, right? And, you know, he's a businessman today. He's a former ambassador of the United States of America for Australia, in the United States of America for Australia, and a former treasurer. But I'm going to go right back to 2000. I think it was 2002. I had the Wizard Business partnership with Packer. And it was the beginning. It was February 2002, I think. Interest rates hadn't come off for a long time. And you were the Minister for Finance, and Peter Costello was a treasurer at the time. So you were much younger.
99.
Much younger bloke.
Yeah.
Much younger bloke. So I get a phone call. The first Reserve Bank meeting was about to happen on the Tuesday of February, first Tuesday of February. And everyone knew they're going to drop interest rates. And they did. They dropped interest rates. So I get a phone call from Minister Joe Hockey. And he says to me, hey, mate, he said, Treasurer wants to know, because in those days, the Treasurer and the Prime Minister used to talk in Parliament all the time about the competition against the banks. Mm-hmm. And I was around, Aussie was around, but Aussie had been around for a bit longer than me, so he had a bigger profile. But Minister Hockey says to me on the telephone, Mark, we notice you're dropping your interest rates. And I said, yes, we announced we're going to drop our interest rates. And he said, how much by? And I said, 25 basis points, which was just ahead of the Reserve Bank. And Minister Hockey said, and when will we be passing that interest rate reduction on? I said, well, funny you should say that. I said, because we're thinking about passing it on much more quickly, because in those days you pass an interest rate increase on straight away, an interest rate reduction 6 weeks later.
Correct.
So we'd hold the money for a bit, you know. We also make money. And he said, when do you think you're going to do that? And because there was a big bone of contention with consumers that this rort was happening. I said, well, I don't know, thinking 13 days. He said, oh, that's very interesting. I'll tell the Treasurer that. But I said, I've got to check. I said, I've got to go check to Kerry Packer. I've got to say, Kerry, like Minister Hockey's on the phone. The Treasurer's going to talk about this in Parliament. I said, I will pass the rate reduction on 12 days. And Kerry nearly had apoplexy. Like he said, what the fuck are you doing that for? That's when we make our money and during these periods of change. I said, yeah, but you know, the minister is thinking it would be good for Australians. We need to change the landscape. It's unfair that we put it up straight away and put it down. So I think we should do it. He said, okay, son. He said, I trust you do it. So I thought, oh, good. So I ring Minister Hockey back up and say, Joe, 12 days. He said, it's interesting, Mark. He said, I was talking to Westpac, and Westpac are thinking of doing it in 9 days. I went, oh, fuck. He said, would you go 8? And I thought, oh, my God. And I thought, I can't ring Kerry up. I cannot ring Kerry. If I ring Kerry, he'll kill me. And I thought, Westpac, 9, can we go 8? Because I can't let Westpac own this now. Now I've always started, I've got to own it. I went 8 days. And I've never known to this very day whether or not you were telling me the truth or not.
I always tell the truth.
Because I had this straight after, I had this sneaking suspicion that I'd just been jammed and set up so bad. But that's
fantastic. You'd be jammed between Kerry Packer and Joe Hockey.
Oh,
pretty
jammed
impressive.
pretty hard. And I felt, but the good thing about it was, and we don't see this in politics today, the good thing about it is that treasurers and then you later became the treasurer later on, but treasurers and ministers for finance, as you were, financial services, I think it was called at the time. And it was 2001 actually, Joe, not 2002. Took risks and were active in the marketplace, like our marketplace, and put pressure on people. I've never heard a word from. I did hear from Scott at one stage and Josh, but I've never heard a word from Jim. What do you think about this as a representative of a big part of the marketplace?
Yeah, the environment changes, but I grew up in a small business family, and it was just what was bred into me. And
no problem putting pressure on me at all. Zero, like it was second nature.
I remember ringing Roger Corbett when he was putting up prices with the GST, and he was putting it up ahead of the introduction of the GST. And I said to him, Mr. Corbett, if we need to have a body swing from a light pole in Martin Place and it's yours, then so be it. But you're not putting up prices until we get rid of all the other taxes.
As you know, he was
running Woolies.
Woolies at the time.
Yeah, that's right. And he had to get people into all the Woolies overnight, charge 13 million tags. Had to remove 13 million price tags.
It would have cost
Alan
them.
Fells, it cost them a fortune. But, that's the way it should be. It's not intimidation or bullying. It's about what's best for the Australian consumer.
100%. So where has that changed, Joe? Like, it's different today, and there might be a whole lot of good reasons for it, but where has that changed in Australia? Why has it changed?
I don't know. I've always been that sort of person. It's just, maybe because I'm more familiar with business. I grew up engaging with business at a very young age. I was never really intimidated by business. I remember meetings with Kerry Packer when he wanted to buy the Sydney Morning Herald.
That's right, I remember
Oh, my God. In fact, I was sharing that to some of the stories with.
He doesn't hold back.
No, well, it's funny. I had caught up with Kerry Stokes, and we were reflecting on all those days when all that media ownership law was changing and how the Kerrys went to war with each other, and it was it was a different environment. And see, I think now business is more removed from politics. And
I think that's right.
And part of it is shareholders say, don't engage with politicians, don't donate to politicians. So the danger is you become removed from the people that are generating the economy. And so I think bigger business is friendless. And partly it's the fault, or overwhelmingly it's the fault of big business because they stopped donating to the parties and therefore they're being called out for behaviour and they've got no friends. You saw that with the banking reforms under Malcolm Turnbull. We see the way the mining companies are treated today, and it's very hard in politics to go and bat for business if it's not in the best interests of small business and consumers.
I'm not sure, but did you have a small business under your portfolio?
I had small business, I had small business, not on that one. No, I was small business and tourism after that.
Yeah, okay. I do remember you having small business under your portfolio.
And I loved it. I mean, in fact, I've started a small business now. And
well, it's actually not so small, but yes.
Yeah, but I mean, I started it, filling out a bank application form in the US.
Opening up a bank account. Well, it's called Bondi Partners.
It is, yeah.
And you're effectively putting parties to parties. So
it's the interaction between politics and business. And we've got a consultancy arm, we've got a capital arm, we've got an investment fund investing in companies and national security in Australia and the US and UK. We've got an M&A advisory arm, we've got an advocacy arm, and we're in Australia, the US, UK, Japan we just opened. So
it looks very much, in some respects, it looks very much like a very early stage Macquarie Bank without being a bank. In that Macquarie Group, I mean, not the bank part of it, but the Macquarie Group part of it. You got funds, you got investments, you got advice, a lot of advisory stuff, but you're sort of making markets between people and regions.
Well, it's hard going to another country, and it's really expensive, particularly for SMEs. Going to the United States, I mean, people think, for example, going to the United States is just like going to Queensland. Well, it's not. I mean, it's very different. And so same with the UK, they don't really understand. UK's always looked at the EU rather than at the US. And Americans coming here have a little bit of a tinge of arrogance. They know how to deal with it, just like going to California. I mean, as I say to Americans, they say, what are Australians like? I say, well, we're just like Californians, except we like America. That's the difference, right? They're like, oh, yeah, okay, we get it now.
And so, how much of that, Joe, do you get a leg up from being the ambassador? Because ambassadorship, which you took on 15, 16, 17, was that?
Yeah, 16, years? Yeah.
16,
4
17,
years.
4 years. How much do you get out of that?
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, it's look, if I was still a lawyer, as I was way back, maybe I'd be a partner at Cause and would have been accounting for every 6 minutes of my life.
And you'd be charging me, well, actually, I used Mallison's recently and they charged me $1,500 an hour.
Well, that's okay. That's a good fee.
Yeah, that was
mid-range.
A lot more. I charge more now. No, it's actually quite inexpensive.
Yeah, I'm certainly not that. But I just always felt the need to try and do something better. I felt the need to give. And look, I just enjoyed the US. And after I finished as ambassador, I'm going, well, what do I do now? I've had 24 years in public life. I don't want to be a lobbyist or anything like that. I wanted to do something more substantive. And we ended up doing, fantastic transactions in Australia's interests. Like, the biggest telco in the Pacific was thinking of selling itself to the Chinese. And, I stepped in and worked with the Australian government and the American government and made sure Telstra now owns it, right? So things like that. And then in national security, we're investing in the sort of companies that are going to keep our kids safe. So that's my, there's got to be that element to it to get me really fired up. And yes, of course, all the knowledge I've gained as ambassador or as treasurer or any of them, I'm not going to deny that. That'd be ridiculous. I am what I am.
Yeah, but there's no point in not leveraging what you've done as
treasurer. What else have you got? I mean, it's you leverage all your experience. All of us do. If you've been the world's best plumber, you're going to leverage that. And this is, people often say to me, "What's so and so like?" Well, Trump. What's Trump like? Well, Trump is taking his experience as a New York property developer, and he's taking it to the White House. He's transactional. He does deals. He's polite to people, even the people that he competes against. But he's a hard transactional person, and it's no different with Harris, who's a prosecutor, and Kamala Harris has, been a prosecutor and a lawyer, and we all have. Barack Obama comes across as a university lecturer, and that's what he was. He's a very good university.
Can we talk about Trump?
Oh, yep.
I'm sure you're sick of it, but you're here, so I got to ask you.
No.
Audience wants to talk about Trump. They want to hear about someone who knows the guy for a start.
Yeah.
And in your ambassador role, you get to meet Trump because he was a president during that period.
Well, no, most ambassadors wouldn't have met him. I mean, you meet the president when you become ambassador. You go and present your credentials. So you have a 5-minute meeting with the president. And that time was Barack Obama.
Right.
I met Trump because he was running for office, and my view was he could win, and no one else had that view. And so I was, lonely out there saying I want to engage with the Trump campaign when no one else would, and he was considered, an idiot, and everyone said Clinton's going to win. And that's when the relationship started.
Why did you think he was going to win? What was it that you saw in him?
Mark, I'd like in our politics here, we talk about Betty Bankstown.
Yeah.
And we try and identify the swing voter, the marginal seat voter, and who really matters. How are we going to win her over? And I took that political experience in Australia and campaigns and said, who's the swing voter in America? And we came up with Mary Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right? And I just when I started to define in my own head and to the embassy, Mary Milwaukee, they started to understand that there was something more than Clinton, something more than what was being offered. It was much more complicated. So Mary Milwaukee, and you know, this is sort of typical in one sense, 45 years of age, probably earning $15 an hour for the last 10 years at Walmart in the checkout. You know, she has 2 kids, a boy that's probably done 1 or 2 tours of duty of Afghanistan, probably has PTSD. She has a young daughter she hopes one day would go to college, but she can't afford it. Her husband is one of 1.5 million truck drivers in America that hasn't got a college degree. And she goes to church Wednesdays and Sundays, which is typical in the Midwest. You know, she pays the bills. She holds the family together. She worries about security, the threat of fentanyl. And every night on TV, the Colberts and the Jimmy Kimmels and others laugh at her for going to church, for having traditional values, believing a marriage is between a man and a woman, but, you know, and they laugh at her because she's yesterday, because they see her as yesterday, and they're really about, you know, more a different type of America. And, you know, Mary's there and she's going, hang on, along comes Donald Trump, and he's a very successful person, but he's rude. I don't like that rudeness. But you know what? He not only listens to me, he's fighting for me. He says, you know, Mary, there's nothing wrong with going to church, or there's nothing wrong with, you know, having a history of guns handed through the generation. There's nothing wrong with, you know, having an F-150 pickup truck. There's nothing wrong with not going to university. What's wrong with that? Yeah, in fact, I'm going to fight for you, Mary. And she said, for the first time, someone's come along and fought for me. And you know what? Mary, more white women voted for Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton in 2016, and more white women voted for Donald Trump than Joe Biden in 2020. Because he's suddenly saying, I hear you and I'm fighting for you.
Was that just a clever strategy from his point of view, or is it for real? Like, is he actually want to fight for those people, or did he see them as someone who's going to give him a vote?
Yeah, no, I think he's authentic. And, you know, authenticity is the most valuable commodity in the 21st century, whether it be in business or in politics or anything else. If you're authentic, you can't be fake, you can't lie. People see right through you. And so, you know, Trump, of course, he lies about facts and figures and sort of stuff. But when he says, you know, I want to get out of the war in Afghanistan, you know, he really wanted to get out of the war. When he said, I wanted to build the wall, he really wanted to build the wall. And you know, whether you agree with him or not, he actually delivered on his authenticity. You know, when he's not authentic, I mean, when he gets up at rallies and says, look, my people say I've got to try and win back the female voters, he's right. Like, it's so transparent. He's got the speaking points and he goes, yeah, here are the speaking points my people are giving. What do you think of that? That's why 10, 15, 20,000, 30,000 people bowl up to his rallies all over America. And one day he could speak to 80, 90,000 people, you know, just by going rally to rally. And they keep coming out and they keep hearing the same speech. Amazing.
I once heard someone say that I think it was Franklin. They said Roosevelt. I'm sure. Sorry, Franklin D. Roosevelt was the first president that got there through radio. JFK was the first president, was the TV president because he looked a certain way and acted a certain way. And Trump was the first social media president.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he was good at working social media. Like, and I'm talking about at the time, it would have been Twitter and those other things.
Sure.
He's working with. And I was thinking to myself, Kamala Harris right now seems to be the best at TikTok, like as a new version of social media. Like, Trump doesn't sort of resonate with that audience. She seems to be really good at that. And everywhere I see her, and I don't even know what she stands for. I actually can't pinpoint a policy at this stage. I haven't actually heard her talk about much policy. But she's bloody good in front of the audience in relation to that particular form of social media, which everybody under 30 looks at.
Well, she has successfully married an issue that's emotional and important, like abortion, and the demographic that she really needs to get out to vote, being women under the age of 40.
Right.
And she's used TikTok and Instagram and everything else to get to basically prepare that demographic for the battle of the election and to come out and vote for her and volunteer for her.
So,
and then the endorsement of Taylor Swift and others coming behind it.
So do you think she's had to pick a fight or pick an issue? Because I've been hearing people say this about Albanese lately.
Yeah.
You've got to pick a fight,
Yeah,
mate.
you've got to define yourself. The thing is, Harris has not defined herself. So, bear this in mind. The last election, we didn't have a Biden, a Bush, or a Clinton was 1976, nearly 50 years ago. And there's been one of those three names in every presidential ballot since that time.
Wow.
So name recognition, and that doesn't even include Obama. So name recognition is hugely important, especially when you have voluntary voting. So along comes Harris Walz, and it's really only gone a few weeks to define itself. She's the first candidate since I think 1968 or something who hasn't gone through a primary. So the American primary system basically introduces them to the American people, and particularly the Democrats or the Republicans. And millions of people go out and they spend multi-millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on their campaigns. Harris hasn't gone through that for this election.
Biden went through it, yeah.
Biden went through it, that's right, and Harris hasn't. So she's an unknown to more people than you think. Now, the question in my mind is she how does she differentiate herself from Biden? We know how she differentiates herself from Trump. I mean, she's obviously looking different to Trump. But how does she differentiate herself from Biden? And that's a very tricky issue. So she's not making major policy announcements. She's done fewer press conferences than any other candidate ever for president of the United States since you had your media. And, everyone else has defined her as the candidate. She's done, rather than Kamala Harris defining herself, everyone else has defined her. Clinton's defined her. Biden's defined her. Obama's defined her. That's massive firepower. Oprah's defined her. Taylor Swift's defined her. Everyone else has defined her, whereas, really, she still remains a bit of a big policy mystery.
Do you think that's do you think that's the thought out strategy?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And, so they basically bunkered down Biden in the 2020 election because of COVID, and that sort of worked, and minimum press conferences, whereas Trump is all out there. I mean, everywhere, just spews it out like he's accessible. Even CNN journalists tell me that, he'll ring them at odd hours. And CNN is like the mortal enemy of Donald Trump, but he still rings those journos at odd hours to say, you ought to know this or you ought to know that or well done. And he's very, very open and engaged. It's kind of interesting. He's, privately, he is a curious mind.
You mean curious to you or curious himself?
No, curious. He asks a lot of questions.
Right.
He says, and they could be, the conversations I've had, they've drifted from are the koalas going to survive the bushfires through to, is Malcolm Turnbull really that rich? I mean, it's like bizarre.
It's like random.
It's random. And they'll come out, you jump from topic to topic, and then he'll get on to golf and, or something like that. It's like really, he's got a very curious mind and he listens carefully. And if he finds a bit of information he likes, he'll grab onto it.
What's it take to be a US president, do you think? I mean, looking as an observer, because I'll be honest, it doesn't seem like either one of them are great candidates to me.
Sure.
Would I, if I was American, would I want either one of them running my country? I'm not sure.
Sure.
But what do you think it takes to be a great president of the United States? Because I could say what I think it takes to be a great Prime Minister of Australia from what I've observed, but I don't know about the United States. What is it? What are we looking for?
It's the same thing. It's conviction.
Conviction.
You have to believe that, you'll call it and you'll call it right. And there'll be times when you don't. And the hard part is knowing when you've made a wrong call and you've got to change direction.
But a lot of the calls these days are critical calls.
Oh,
Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Gaza.
Yeah.
I mean, they're big. China.
Yeah. Oh, it's the hardest job in the world. President of the United States. You know, one of the things that struck me, Mark, when I was ambassador was how the whole world expects America to fix their problems.
Yeah.
Deep, dark Africa, someone's got a problem. South America, there's a battle between Brazil and Colombia, or Brazil and Peru, or Chile, or whatever. The US has got to fix it. In the Caribbean, in Canada, up in the northern border, or in Europe, you know, two countries have a fight, or in the Pacific, you know. Everyone expects America to solve their problems. And by the way, the US president has to be a president for the United States as well, has to worry about healthcare, education, domestic violence, you know, et cetera, immigration. I think it's just an impossible job. And what you have to do is set a tone and then have conviction behind it. So the great conviction presidents like Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Delano Roosevelt or you know, I'd put in there, you know, LBJ, conviction.
Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Yeah, I'd put him in there. I think he was one of the great US presidents. You know, for what his conviction on breaking down the racial barriers in the US was phenomenal. Really was phenomenal. And then Ronald Reagan, of course, you know, his conviction, his sense of purpose, you got to clearly know what's right and wrong. And he did that with the Soviet Union when it was pretty tense. And so conviction politicians are the people I most admire. And I find are the best to work. John Howard was a conviction.
Totally.
You know, and Bob Hawke was a conviction. He knew where he wanted to go. I think the Australia's been best served by conviction leaders.
It's funny, I was only saying that the other day, irrespective of Hawke or Howard, they're different in politics in terms of which side, one's blue, one's red, but they were two of our best.
Yeah,
I think.
Of course. I mean, you know, I was privileged to be in John Howard's cabinet. He promoted me very early, at a very young age. And, you know, I wasn't of the more conservative persuasion of the Liberal Party, so he saw me a little like a black sheep, I think. But he was magnanimous and he always listened. He was very good at listening to the Australian people, as was Hawkey. Hawkey was a mate of mine, a golf buddy, and I'm not convinced, but I'm close to being convinced he actually might have voted for me on one or two occasions.
Oh, really?
Well, there were some Labor leaders he really didn't like, but I don't know. But he, you know, they're just really wise and they're good listeners. I find the best leaders in business or in politics, any discipline, are good listeners.
Yeah, that's very interesting you should say, because I was only sort of complaining or moaning or whatever word it is, the lack of policy of our current government. And I think and I'm not having a crack at them here. I think it's because of the way politics works today and who is voting for you, who you are representing, and they represent the Labor Party today in federal politics represents such a broad array of different people. That's so broad. It's a massive church for them. Whereas the Liberals are more just conservatives, a little bit broader than they were in the past, but nowhere near like Labor. And it must be virtually impossible for Labor to be able to satisfy everybody, therefore don't make any decisions.
And that's why the primary vote is 31%. I mean, Labor, you know, mate, I've got to tell you, when I was in politics, not that long ago, we formed the view that we had to have a primary vote of 44 to win government, and Labor needed a primary vote of 41, 42. Labor's currently polling 31.
Yeah.
Now, you know, you're having your meal eaten away by all the Greens, the Teals, where the Liberal Party had it with the Teals, but still we're getting close to 40. Still got a way to go to get up to 44. But you see, it's just, you know, social media's changed it. You know, what social media has done is it's made the voice of the critic much louder than the voice of the advocate.
Yeah.
And what, you know, I sort of thump the table when I read in a paper or something or online, someone say, oh, well, we need the government to lay down this reform. Actually, you know, if you come out and you have the biggest tax policy change you can say today, it'll be yesterday's news by tomorrow. Everyone overnight would be smashing it on social media and you just go, okay. So my view today is the best government is the one that interferes the least in your life.
You mean in a regulatory sense?
Yeah,
or?
Regulatory sense and taxation sense, so on. Don't get the government to solve your problem. You get the opportunity to solve your problem and get the government out of the way. I mean, look, we're talking about housing in Australia.
Yeah, I was going to say what about housing?
Housing is a great example, mate. I don't know if you've done a renovation lately. I've done a renovation.
I did, and I went over budget by 4 times.
Mate, I'm railing against this. I want to put up a carport, single carport in my backyard. It costs $4,000, and I've been told I have to go to council. It's going to cost me $7,000 to go to council.
Just for the council?
For the council.
Yeah.
I have to put in a DA for it, right? Because it's a heritage area. I'm just putting up a temporary carport. And you're going, why do I bother, right? So you're not going to get more construction of housing if you're spending a vast amount of money on red tape and green tape. And I know where this comes from. Everyone's trying to mitigate risk. Well, we've got to be prepared to take risk.
We the consumer?
We the consumer. You have to have some risk.
Yeah, but how can we say to the government department, you don't need to take the risk, we'll take it?
Yeah, well, that's the point. It comes back to personal responsibility and the fact that you do take a risk. I'm not saying you don't have DAs. Of course you do. And you've got to have communities and so on. But it's just ridiculous, the amount of paperwork.
Yeah.
And then, it adds to the cost of everything. And, plumbers and electricians, we haven't got enough of them. They're getting tired. They're fantastic, the tradies, and the quality of the work they do is often very good in Australia, but they're tired. I mean, they're hitting 60 and you're crawling under a house to do the plumbing or the electricals, right? And you can't get people to do it. So I think there's just, somehow we've got to let the market have a solution to some of these issues. And that means freeing up land, having, potential for more high rise, et cetera, et cetera. But, it's highly contentious.
You, during your Treasurer period, did have something to say about negative gearing?
Sorry?
You did have something to say about negative gearing during your
I did, yeah, of course, yeah.
And I have to, and I will be honest, I did do an article with the AFR some years before that, and I actually said negative gearing is actually not good policy, but it's not good economic policy, right? But I said it'd be silly to get rid of it because it's too indentured into our system today. Yeah.
So here's the solution: negative gearing.
Yeah.
Right? Gratuitous advice.
No, I want to hear it.
40,000 feet, 13,000 miles in Washington, right? Negative gearing is a tool used to encourage investment in income-producing assets, right? And treasurers of both persuasions, Labor and Liberal, have skewed the taxation system towards favouring investment in equities over investment in real estate. Why? Because, as an economist will tell you, a dollar that goes into an old home, right, is a dollar that is sort of lost forever until you sell the home. Whereas you put a dollar into BHP, they'll take that dollar, they'll buy new equipment, build a new mine, and they'll give you a return. So the question is, how do we get real estate to become productive? Now, of course, the productive real estate is when you're building new homes. Yeah. That's employing people. That money is at work until it's done, and then it's not at work, right? So that's why on real estate, we still have land tax, we still have stamp duty, and on shares, you've got franking credits, you've got no stamp duty, you've got no land tax. So it's the taxation system is skewed. Still negative gearing, the same economic tool applied to real estate, applied to shares, but the shares are far more attractive than the real estate, right? So because real estate, if you take away negative gearing on investment real estate, rents are going to go up. It's as simple as that, right? And in other countries, they have rent control or rent subsidies. Well, we can't do that. That's ridiculous. The market is at play. But if you really want to get more housing, double or perhaps increase by 50% the negative gearing entitlement on new real estate. So there's an incentive to go and buy new real estate.
Put new money into the system.
Exactly.
That gets circulated.
It gets the jobs going. It gets the housing construction going. And plus, it helps to subsidise the new housing for people that really need it.
And what about the capital gains tax on the other end? Because I
wouldn't change the capital gains tax arrangement.
Just leave the discount as it is.
Yeah, well, it's not even a discount. I mean, it's competitive with other countries. And, in the United States, for example, they have increased tax so high that everyone keeps rolling their money in till a capital gains tax opportunity arrives. It's a bit the same in your own business in Australia. You'll keep rolling the money in because if you take it as income, you pay 50%. If you sell your business, you only pay 25% on the money. Right?
And it's cheaper that way. So, do you think that this government? I mean, and I've noticed that Paul Keating's been getting stuck into his own party, and Bill Kelty more recently has even weighed in.
Knows how that goes. The whole Prime Minister's
yes, they do.
Into their party.
But that's unusual for Labor. They're usually pretty staunch.
Sure.
Like Keating's had a lot of cracks at a lot of things that have been going. I've actually tried to get him on the show, but particularly in relation to our relationship with China and also in relation to AUKUS.
Yeah.
He's been quite.
He's old guard on that. He's wrong.
What do you think about that? AUKUS?
Mate,
and what do you think about his commentary?
Oh, look, I think Paul Keating was a pioneer in a number of areas, but he's just dead wrong. On
Economically, 100%.
Yeah.
The superannuation guarantee, good.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Like the deregulation of the banking system, great.
Yeah.
Floating the dollar,
all those things. Yeah,
but this
dead wrong, and the wrong motivations. I mean, China is first and foremost about Beijing's interest. We don't share values with China. I mean, I've got many Chinese friends. I had a great relationship with the Chinese government over many years. But understand this, their first priority in China is the welfare of the Communist Party. They're not our friend when it comes to values. The UK and the US are our friend. They're our allies. They've shed blood for us. We've shed blood for them. That's where it goes. And then the only country in the world that is successfully marrying capital with innovation on a grand scale is the US. So from an economic perspective, the US is as much opportunity as China, if not more, as is, with the emergence of India and all the others. But the bottom line is the US is our closest friend. Our integration in their security system and their integration in ours means that, of the last 13 attempted terrorist attacks in Australia, probably 8 or 9 would have been thwarted with the help of US intelligence agencies. And
really, wow, that's amazing.
We share a lot of intelligence. They've got 16 intelligence agencies, and I would say we're embedded in most of them. And then when it comes to the military, at various times, we've had military personnel in up to 32 US states. And people don't know about it. And then they're embedded with us. And I tell you what, I'd rather have them with us than any other country in the world.
It's funny, I interviewed Trump and
when was that?
I interviewed him in 2016. He gave me a half hour interview.
Oh.
And he railed against China. And I got quite nervous because 16 was a period when you were around, and China was our biggest trading partner, emerging as the biggest trading partner. They might have just got ahead of Japan and Korea.
Yeah, they were by that stage, for sure.
And I was sort of trying to think, well, this is not going so good here. Look, I'm getting a bit nervous. And but he didn't hold back, and he said sort of the same type of thing as you. Not suggesting you're the same, but he talked about values, the Chinese values relative to our values, relative to the American values.
Yeah, and fair enough. That's what they are. But I mean, if you look at the history, right, and it's really important. China, Russia, and the US all were born out of revolutionary wars. All three countries really had big revolutionary wars, and then they followed up with big civil wars. And what happens in a civil war is no one trusts their neighbor anymore. It's something you can go years and years and generations, but at the end of the day, you don't really trust the person next door or the person on the other side of the country. So in China and Russia, head office, Moscow and Beijing, rule with an iron fist. That's how they keep control and so on. In the US, they fear Washington ruling with an iron fist. So that's the Constitution. That's why Americans proudly are still state-based. They rail against Washington. That's why Trump has that, right? Has that capacity. He's railing against Washington. He's not of the establishment. And Americans feel that sense of comfort. Australia is a bit the same. They rail against Canberra. We're sort of more agreeable to Canberra, but we're sort of railing. We don't want it to lose our power to Canberra. And that's why states' rights are still very powerful here. And on China, Trump is very consistent. He has been very consistent. Of course, he says, I'll deal with the president and do a deal, a great deal. But the bottom line is, they're different values. And that's really important.
And it's okay to accept that, by the way.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, the Chinese understand that. That's why they still buy our iron ore and our coal and everything else. That's why they want to get on with us. They're pragmatic. And by the way, they've got a lot of domestic problems in China as well. So I don't think that it's all
particularly economically.
Economic, absolutely. I mean, when I was treasurer, I had a great relationship with Lou Jiwei, the finance minister of China. And he rang me up one day and said, look, Joe, I've got to put a tariff on your coal. And I said, but we're about to sign a trade agreement where you abolish the tariffs. He said, I've got a few domestic issues. It's only going to be for 6 months. I said, okay.
And did it only last 6 months?
Yeah. And then
what do you think then? What's your insight around what did Scott say that really got them upset? Because, whilst we're talking about the values of China and Australia and they accept it, they're practical, they understand it. What was it that really got up their nose about Scott?
I think it was unquestionably calling for a global inquiry into the source of COVID. So
blaming them effectively.
Oh, yeah. And China was very embarrassed about COVID, as they should be. I mean, you think about it. No event in the history of humanity has affected every single household on the face of the earth.
Except COVID.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, we've had wars and we've had, famines and, environmental events. But the only event that went to every single house, every single home, every single person on the face of the earth was COVID. And China was responsible.
Do you think for sure?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. There's no doubt about it. But, I think Scott Morrison calling for confirmation of that was just, China's all about face.
Right.
Very much about face. And that was seen as confrontation. But he was right to do it. It was the right thing to do. He said,
I was going to say, do you think that was the right thing to do?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But the punishment, did it befit the crime though?
Oh, how did they punish it? So they didn't buy some wine. They didn't buy
lobsters.
Sorry?
Some lobsters.
Didn't buy lobbies. Yeah. We had cheap lobbies for a long time in Australia.
And do you think that Trump then plays it right then when in terms of how he talks about China?
No,
in terms of adding tariffs, everything is going to come into it.
Yeah, I mean he's playing a race card to some degree.
Is that a good narrative to win an election?
Well, I'd hope not, but it is what it is. I mean, it's long been that sort of situation.
What do you think is the net effect if Trump wins economically?
His policies are I don't know if they're policies or their thoughts, but the amount of announcements he's made, if he were to deliver them on tax cuts, tariffs and everything else, would be diabolical.
In what regard? Economically, I'm talking about.
Economically, I mean, the US is just running a massive deficit.
Yeah.
It's borrowing from the rest of the world. Congress keeps approving these big deficit budgets to the extent that, that if the US dollar is not the reserve currency of the world, they're screwed. So, and there's nothing else at the moment, but, they're screwed. So the US, can't sustain that. Trump's making it worse. He said he's going to reduce company tax to 15%. He said to go even further. He said he's going to carry on the tax cuts at sunset next year, but he could go further. He has come out and said credit card interest rates are too high. We're going to cap it at 10%. Sounds great, but how does that work, right? he's come out and he said he won't have a 10% tariff on China. He's going to have a 60% tariff on China.
So that's inflationary.
Oh, man. Inflation goes through the roof because America has, I think it's about a $500 billion trade deficit with China.
Whoa.
That means they're bringing it in, right? They're not manufacturing it. And even if in the US they were going to manufacture it, they couldn't build that manufacturing overnight. So they're going to suddenly have a 60% increase in the price of $500 billion worth of goods flows through the economy.
And it ends up here too. Because we import that inflation.
Oh, of course we do. We import it. But what it'd mean, it'd crash out the US dollar. And you're starting to see that, with interest rates coming down the US, you're seeing, it's a great trade at the moment, buying the Aussie, selling the US, but it'd go, it'd head towards parity.
What about if she wins though?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's much better because she's talking about price controls. And even Debbie, she said she's going to price control groceries. And everyone's going, well, how's that going to work? And that was the last economic policy she announced. And it sort of faded off a bit. So no one quite knows what her economic policies are.
Can I just switch direction a little bit now and just talk about Australia? Because, we got an election coming up and we've got the RBA.
We've always got an election coming up.
We seem to have. Yeah. By the way, that seems to be a problem to me. Like they're too regular.
But we do have stability. I mean, I'm really impressed with both the Labor Party and the Liberal Party having leadership stability. Thank God.
You're talking in terms of Dutton and Albanese.
Yeah. And they're respectful of each other.
Do you think Albanese does have stability or do you think Jim's sit there?
No.
I mean, that article, that storyline narrative that was written this week that Jim sort of lobbed that Treasury paper out on negative gearing just when he happened to be going overseas.
Treasurers cop that all the time.
Do they? But, well, you know how it works. So how did it work? How does that work? So if the Treasury, the Department of Treasury is doing some research on a topic, are they likely to be doing it on their own or would the Treasurer have asked them to do it?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of both. It's a grey area.
Well, because you're in business today, you've got to be careful.
No. It's a grey area. I asked Treasury when I was there, I said, do me a tax options paper, but let me tell you what I'm not going to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they came up with an options paper. I released it and, nothing was implemented. So, it varies. Of course, from a budget perspective, you'll have options. So when it comes to spending money, you bring in all your colleagues and you have an expenditure review committee and the finance minister is cracking the gavel and so on and so forth. But when it comes to revenue raising, it's just the treasurer. Oh, yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. Maybe you let the Prime Minister in. In fact, when I was writing my first budget speech, Tony Abbott said, mate, you're going to send it to me? I'd like to have some input into the speech. I said, no.
Really?
Yeah. I said, no. I consulted previous treasurers and I said, no, you don't show it to the Prime Minister. It's your speech.
And what was Abbott like to work with?
He was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a very, very decent guy.
And he's quite intelligent, they tell me. Very smart guy.
Very smart. He's sharp. He's a very decent guy. I wish the public had seen the Tony Abbott that I know. He comes across as a sort of policy warrior and, traditionalist and all that sort of stuff. But there's another Tony Abbott that people don't know, and he is a very selfless person. He's a very decent human being.
And as far as I'm aware, definitely not a misogynist.
No.
Which is what I know Julia was sort of trying to make out. He was.
I was in the chamber for that speech, and it's been embellished and, become sort of iconic for a certain cohort in the community, but he's not. He's not. I mean, but he suffered the same fate as Trump. He should have had more diversity in the cabinet, and Trump should have probably he would be doing better if he had a female vice presidential candidate.
And when you look at politics today, I mean, the bear pit part of politics, do you think it's descended into worse territory than it was when you were around, or is it better?
No.
I
miss question time.
Do you?
Oh, I loved question time. And, it's so good. It's so accountable. Other parliaments, I've got friends in the British Parliament and all parliaments around the world, and they just can't believe the Australian Parliament. And you know what? The accountability is extraordinary.
What do you mean they can't believe? What's the difference between us and them?
Because you walk in, you don't know what the questions are, and it's brutal. I mean, I remember, I remember when the GST was being introduced, I was responsible for that, and I got 10 questions in a row in question time, and I'd like exhausted. Like it's like, seriously, flagellation on a grand scale. And everyone would be going, God, 10 questions. How did you do that? And then I go and the next day I get 10 more questions. I remember John Howard slapping me on the back and saying, oh, you're losing a bit of bark, but you'll be okay. And I'm like, God, I was like, how do I do it? And you get the adrenaline before question time because you've got to be on top of your brief. Because not only do the opposition find out, your own colleagues work out, and then the gallery and everyone else knows you're not on top of your brief. So you need to know everything about your portfolio. And when you're the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, you need to know particularly. So, when I delivered the 14 budget that everyone still talks about, rightly so, it was a great budget. And the 14 budget, I went on Q&A by myself.
Q&A on the ABC?
Yeah, on the ABC. Q&A by myself. And everyone thought I was going to fail. And it was Penrith Panthers, 600 people. Apparently, it was one of the highest ever rating Q&As.
Not a friendly environment, a Q&A.
No, it wasn't a friendly environment. But I had to show that I was on top of my brief. And I have never in my life ever got such a big response as I did after that from people saying, wow, that was, really important, really great you did it, and great performance and all that sort of stuff. Because you had the opportunity to shine in adverse circumstances. And in Parliament, you can shine and get a message across when it's most hostile. It's not, you can't create that environment.
I got a sense that you're missing a bit.
I miss question time. I don't mind I don't mind the tough questions and so on. I want to be on top of my game, and and America would be so much better if it had its cabinet subject to that cross-examination on the floor of Congress. They do it a bit in the Senate hearings and so on, but, that's just 1 hour every 4 months, 6 months, whereas question time's every day Parliament sitting. And the British Parliament, they don't do it every day. They have Prime Minister's questions once every 2 weeks or 1 week, something like that. So I think Australia has a great democracy and great accountability. It's one of the reasons why we've got so little corruption. That's why we do have a really good political system.
Well, and if I was to ask you now, Joe, said only based on what you know so far, what do you think will happen in the election next year, Australia?
Oh, well, it's obviously going to be close. Firstly, do not believe that a government cannot lose in the first term. It can. Yep. And Anthony Albanese wasn't elected with the majorities that Howard had in 96, that Rudd had in 2007, or that Abbott had in 2013. We had 20, 30 seats. He's got, I think, 5 or 6, right? So you can lose very quickly. The second thing is you've got to have an agenda. And I think Peter Dutton's done a great job in rolling out an agenda. Controversial at times, but everyone really does know what Peter Dutton stands for. And I think, and Anthony Albanese is a very decent guy. I mean, he's a mate of mine, to be honest. And, he's a very decent guy. He needs to have something that he's going to fight for. And the hardest election I ever fought, Mark, you remember it? GST election, 1998. Oh, my God. And it was just absolute conviction. I just couldn't stand. I was campaigning. And when the butcher at Camaret told me, he grilled me on the GST for like an hour and a half, and I won vote, and I'm working overtime on him because I'm thinking he speaks to people that come in. And then he said, I hate the bloody thing. I'm not gonna support it. And then as I'm walking out, he said, oh, all right, I'll vote for you. And I thought, I was just exhausted, right? And I thought, oh my God, if we've had the courage to go to the electorate with something that is unpopular, but it's absolutely the right thing for Australia. And when we won, I was so elated, more than any other time, because it restored my faith in the Australian population.
So what do you think, but what controversial topic or controversial conviction that either one of the parties should be going to the election with? I mean, nuclear is one, but what other things, is there something that you reckon would be a winner?
Well, I think you've got to show Australians how you're going to make their lives better.
Yeah, what's in it for me?
And that's right, and that's fair enough.
Yeah,
I mean that's the world we've grown up in and live in. but the thing is, it's not always going to be ice cream and lollies. Sometimes you got to have your veggies, and it's the courage to say to people, actually, we're going to have to do some hard yards here. Now, I admit, 2014, my budget, I tried to do that. And what people said, was maybe it was my failure, maybe it was our failure, whatever the case, maybe we didn't prepare the ground. But in that budget, think of it. I was murdered for a $5 co-payment to go and see a doctor.
This is the austerity period.
Yeah. And I said, if we don't fix the roof now while the sun's shining, then we're going to end up in worse shape. And what happened? Now, how much does it cost to go and see a doctor?
Oh.
Right? $40, $50, people are telling me.
Plus.
Yeah, that's right. If we had have got that through, it would have had some semblance of co-payment. And by the way, 6 million people were excluded from any payment, right? So that was lost. And then, more of a work for the dole and a few things that we had. And a lot of them actually went through from the 14 budget. Just took a few years. But there were other things. You look at Western Sydney Airport. That was that budget. No government had the balls to do it for 50, 60 years. And the Abbott hockey government did. And now, I was so proud. I saw Albanese yesterday.
A plane took off there yesterday.
Yes, I'm so proud of that, right? I'm so proud of it. West Connect Stage 2, some of these things around Sydney. Every city in Australia got some infrastructure. The Medical Research Future Fund. I nearly died trying to get that up, and it got up. Now, when I hear a mate of mine who's a professor in eye surgery, he got $40 million from that fund to build an eye. And he's close to it. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're investing in our health. So there are things you do in politics. And I'd love my children to go into politics. I'd love anyone's children, anyone to go into politics, is you can make a difference. You really can. And you know what? They're not going to build monuments to you, but you just got to look around and you see a better quality of life, and that's all worth it for everyone.
And quick prediction on the US?
Mate, too close to call.
It's that close.
It is really that close. So because of the electoral system, Harris needs to win the national vote by about 3%, 2 to 3%. She's polling 1.5 to 2. I have if enthusiasm were the poll, she'd be through the roof. Trump, I think of everyone that's going to vote for Harris is going to tell you. I reckon 5 out of 100 that are voting for Trump won't tell you. And that's been proven in the past.
So therefore the polls aren't correct necessarily.
No, his polls are not correct. I think hers are probably correct where she's at, but I think they're underestimating him by varying from place to place 1 to 3%.
Because people are sort of not ashamed, but maybe embarrassed to say
of course, they don't want to tell it because they fear they're going to be,
ostracized
and smashed. In 2020, I remember speaking to people in the richest area of Houston, and they said, "Come down," and that was one of the rare places you could go during that period. And they're all, Biden signs. I said, "Oh my God!" I said, "If Biden's, he's going to romp at home if this demographic." And they said, "Oh God, we'd never put a Trump sign up. Our house would be egged and everything else." That area voted 70% Trump.
Wow.
So it's a very hard to read. Wisconsin last election, they underestimated Trump's vote by 5%. In 2016, it was about 7%. They underestimated it. So, and Wisconsin is a key state. So I think it's incredibly close. And the House and the Senate are incredibly close as well. So, I met with a delegation this morning. The 2 Republicans told me they thought it's probable that Harris might win. And the 2 Democrats told me they thought Trump would win. So, there you go.
And Joe, just fine, mate. Are you enjoying your life?
Oh, mate, I am. I've been blessed, mate. I'm the son of a Palestinian refugee, came to Australia, never thought he'd ever get a chance to live a life. Met a PICS model from Bondi, got to name my firm Bondi Partners.
Pix model being the magazine Pix.
Magazine Pix, yes, that's right.
Yeah. They were always in the barber shop and in the dentist and the doctor.
Well, it was respectable in those days.
Yeah.
It was like, fashion and so on in the 1930s, the 1940s, from 1940s and 50s. And I wouldn't, I pinch myself how lucky I am. And, when I go to Washington, I've got great mates in the White House and outside the White House. And, I still have conversations with people where I go, I can't believe I'm listening to this.
And do you see the current ambassador? Do you have much to do with Kevin?
I do. And, Kevin, of course, I was on Sunrise with him for 10 years, right? Morning TV. And we're yin and yang, and I love taking the mickey out of it.
But do politics drop away then when he takes over the ambassadorship and you sort of chew him into it?
It's Team Australia, always.
Yeah.
No
matter what.
No matter what. Kim Beazley was great to me. All of us, chip in to help.
Arthur was after you, I think.
Arthur was after me.
Yeah.
Everyone. Arthur's great. And no, it's Australia first, always, and as it should be, right? And so I, kept telling major Republicans and Trump people that Kevin's a good man and he's doing the right thing by Australia and he's got Australian support, and that's what you do. But
hasn't helped by what he said in the past. But
no, and but Trump's got a long list before he gets to Kevin Rudd.
Yeah,
right?
true.
A long list. But I'll tell you a funny story. He's like, I for my sins did Q&A, just before he was announced, and Stan Grant asked me. He said, who should be the ambassador to replace Arthur Sindhugas? I said, I don't want to get into it, And he said, come on, And I said, well, maybe Julia Gillard or something. He says, what about Kevin Rudd? And I said, well, I thought we liked the Americans. Kevin was ropeable.
Was he?
So, oh, God. So, I'm sitting on my couch in Washington, D.C. and hi, Joe, Kevin, I'm coming over. And I said, no. He comes over and second bottle of wine's done. And he said, why do you hate me? I said, mate, I don't hate you. He said, why did you say that? I said, mate, you're going to have a sense of humour after all these years. Let's have a sense of humour here. It's like,
and open up another bottle.
Open another bottle. So, he and he's doing a great job. He really is. He's it adds enormous gravitas to have a former Prime Minister as ambassador.
Yeah.
As I say, he finally got the promotion. And then the second thing is, he has worked really hard at it. And I've defended him publicly, and that's awkward for some of my team back in Australia in politics, but it's the right thing to do. He is. He's been doing a good, assiduous job.
Well, mate, you're doing a great job. You're one. I've always been a fan of Joe Hockey, as you know, but you've done a great job for us both in politics in Australia, but also representing us in America.
Thanks,
and what you're doing with your business these days, I'm hearing all the stories. I mean, I hear lots of people talk to me. Lots of people tell me about what Bondi Partners are doing. Outside of our usual group of friends. I hear your name raised a lot. So, mate, congratulations and well done. And thanks.
Mate, I'm taking a leaf out of you. If I could be 1/10 as successful as Mark Bouris, I'll tell you what, I'll be happy.
I tell you where you are successful. You're still married and you've got a lovely family, mate. You're 100 times more successful than me.
They might not love me quite the same.
They do.
Oh, yeah.
Good to see you, mate.
But thank you so much, mate.
Good to see you, mate.